Hi, so Lourdes has asked me to talk a little bit about what we've just been up to. So I was in a 2.5-hour shift in the plenary session of the European Parliament, and then I was asked to do a little 5-minute thing that turned into a 15-minute thing in the booth, as you saw. And there were two main impressions that I was left with. The first was a feeling of alienation. I had a very, very strong empty room syndrome, which I'm not used to at all. I've never done non-co-located remote simultaneous interpreting. I obviously work in a hybrid format now during the pandemic and the business continuity mode, so I'm quite used to the speaker not being there and to some of my audience not being there, but to have a completely empty room, and Lourdes actually went out of the booth as well to avoid a reflection. So I did occasionally find my mind wandering, and it was hard for me to keep a grip psychologically on the idea that somebody really needed me and somebody was listening to me. So that impeded my communicative abilities, I think. And the other dilemma was more related to the material, to the source material. There was a constant question in my mind about how specific to be and whether my audience is familiar with Spain and its political and administrative organisation or not. And since I didn't have an audience, I had to take lots of decisions on the spot, kind of hypothesizing about possible audiences. So for the sake of consistency, I decided quite early on that I was going to imagine I was being taken on relay by the Chinese booth, and so I was going to try and speak a fairly neutral, clear English in case of doubt, rather than bombarding my listeners with details and very specific Iberian terminology. I was going to try to explain concepts in a much more global, international English. I also tried to veer away from using anything UK specific, which is the English that I know best. So I tried to avoid talking about the Home Secretary, and I would talk about the Minister of the Interior. But when it came to the Council of Ministers and autonomous communities and other very specific examples of Spanish terminology, I tended to gloss with a much more general explanation, talking about the cabinet or about regional governments, regional leaders, and so on. So that was a conscious choice, and I tried to be consistent. Overall, I think imagining the pure customer is very important, and since this video is coming out at exam time of year, yay, we all love exams, I wanted to talk a little bit about preparing for exams, because that's what this felt like to me. This felt much more like an exam than like professional work. First reason, I didn't have an audience, I didn't have a raison d'être, so I didn't feel like I was part of something. I felt like I was being put on the spot and judged by an audience that could go away and watch the recording and compare the original to my version, and this creates a kind of paralysing self-consciousness in the interpreter, which is not at all helpful to doing a good job and to being communicative. So as I say, psychologically I was clinging on to the imaginary pure customer. Back to a few first principles. It can help to put a face, a name on the person. I was very specific about the Chinese booth taking relay, no particular reason for that apart from my affection for China and the fact that I'm missing it. I used to travel there a lot and obviously haven't been able to recently, so I quite liked the idea that if I'm going to be completely alone in an empty room, then why not think of the added value of that situation? I'm not working for the normal audience that might geographically have been in the room, but my voice can be heard around the world. So I was psychologically imagining that I was kind of making a virtue out of a necessity and interpreting remotely for a remote audience that motivated me precisely because they were so remote. I relish the challenge of explaining Spain in a way that a Chinese listener can understand thanks to the English language. That did motivate me. So the more specific, the better, to put a real face on it. You can find your own equivalent pure customer to idealise and think of when all you've got is a row of blank-faced, intimidating examiners in front of you. Also, bear in mind the audience isn't seeking perfection. I mentioned the paralysing self-consciousness. So in this case, I was telling myself that even you, the judges, didn't want perfection. Actually, you want a representative demonstration of what somebody might do in the booth, what I would do in the booth on a real day with a real speech. Warts and all is what you want to see. You don't necessarily want me to have a catastrophic fail. You probably wouldn't mind either. Be interesting. Bad choices make good stories, as they say, so it gives you something else to talk about. But the main point is that it should be representative rather than perfect. So that's why I made all those deliberate mistakes. L'esprit de l'escalier, of course, is easy. It's always easier for the booth mate to get everything than for the person who is actually on mic. So we're constantly thinking of things after the fact. So you can go back and look at the recording and say, I wouldn't have done it like that. I would have done it better. Well, would you really have done it better if you were on the spot facing the kind of alienation and fatigue from having just done a plenary that I've done? Would you? Well, you probably would, yeah, to be honest. But anyway, that's not the point. It doesn't matter. The point is, it's not a competition. It's about illustrating something. So again, if you can remember that in an exam, you're feeling judged, you're feeling like it's a competition, all those things I've just described. So move away from that feeling and say to your examiners, as I say to mine, could you really do this any better if you were put on the spot and you were my age with my amount of experience in this intimidating environment? Remember, when that was you, would you really have done this so differently? The examiners are looking for your potential. They're not looking to damn you. So you can think the way I just was articulating these thoughts, that you turn back on the examiner, who is not omniscient. There is no point in an examiner going back over recordings to check all the details, to check what % of the figures you got or which items on the list. Because, of course, examiners check fidelity, but far more important than being omniscient is the need to be empathetic, to put yourself in the position of somebody performing this activity. So this was fun, and I hope there was something interesting in there for you. I mentioned at the beginning that I hadn't done non-collocated remote simultaneous interpreting before. I also don't work from videos unless I'm given the script. So that was a completely new experience, to interpret a speech that I had absolutely no warning about. I hadn't seen anything in advance, didn't even know the identity of the speaker in advance. I was plunged straight in. And as you can see now, I'm probably communicating more successfully than I did when I was in the booth, because it's no longer empty room syndrome. I've got Lourdes on the other side of the camera, and I'm thinking about all of you at home much more than I did when I was interpreting. So if I could go back and do it again, that's the first thing I would try to do, probably, is really try to imagine more of an audience. But anyway, that's the lesson I've learnt for next time. So I hope that if you are doing exams and you are going to find yourself in any of these situations, including the vague feeling that you're working into the ether and your audience is not as tangible and physical and immediately in front of you as you might like, I think that might be part, at least, of our working lives for some time to come. So whenever you have that kind of feeling, I hope you can cling on to these more positive communicative feelings that I've been trying to evoke.